This Zoom replay was originally streamed July 2020 from Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa. To learn more about upcoming in-person and online programs, please visit our website at menla.org.
It's so lovely to virtually meet you, Bob. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, and now the day comes to finally meet you. I've been inspired by your work for years, and
Really? How nice.
It's lovely to see you. It really is.
Wonderful.
To virtually see you.
Yes. Well, you're an Aussie, so I'm sorry I can't shout you a beer,
You
I only went to Australia one time, but I really liked it. And I was only in Sydney at a happiness conference. And then they taught me a lot of the Australian mannerisms and so on. And I like very outdoor people, very friendly. And I met an American guy, and I was saying how friendly everyone was. And he says, "Oh, yes," he says, "I immigrated here." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "It took me a year to realize that it isn't that the Australians are trying to be friendly. They are friendly." That's what he said.
And it's interesting, the term that you picked up is shouting a beer. That was the first one that came to mind.
Shout a beer.
Yeah, very good, Bob.
Well, I don't really like beer, but I do drink occasionally a little bit of wine or something. But I'm not a big beer drinker. But that's a big thing in Australia. I understand.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
so lovely to meet you. It really
well, I'm so
is.
happy to meet you because I know a little bit about you, but not enough. But I was thinking, well, I'm a grandfather now, but I should finally maybe learn a little bit better, more about parenting than I really know. We had our children under the control of Dr. Spock in the 60s and 70s and 80s, actually. But, my wife is the master parent at our house, but I had my contribution. But anyway, I'm looking forward to what you have to say about it. And then I'll try to chip in whatever notions might come into my aged grandparently head.
And this exploration between the meeting place of simplicity and this middle path of Buddhism is, I think, of such interest to a growing number of people.
Oh, yeah.
The kind of, it's almost like an organic, a very natural meeting place. Just lately, I've been thinking this metaphor of how our children, for all the world, like these beautiful vessels, like this cup that they have, and into this cup, pours life, like the water of life, like there's a tap above this cup, and into this cup comes this water flowing. There's friends, there's play dates, there's worries about health crises. At the moment, there's all kinds of things that are pouring into this cup. In normal times, in regular times, there's, for older ones, there's sports clubs, there's brothers, there's sisters, there's aunts, uncles. All this activity is pouring into their cup. There's school or virtual school, and in it comes. But what I see happening more and more is that there's too much. The tap has been turned on so hard that there's too much coming both into a child's cup, but also into the family's vessel as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when too much comes into a child's cup, over the spillage that comes over the edge, I think we call that anxiety. We call that behavior. And our choice is, do we spend our life as parents mopping up the spillage, or do we do one of two things? That's simply turn down the tap. Just turn down the tap on one level, but also build up the vessel on another.
Sure, of course. Mm-hmm.
And it's not so, I don't know if you've noticed this, Bob, but it's not so easy these days, because when life is moving so fast, when it's booming and buzzing and it's too much, too soon, too sexy, too young. And that's become like so ubiquitous. It's the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look around the neighborhood and everyone else is living this super fast-paced life. But the reality of it is that it's just too much for our kids. It makes them anxious, nervous, and ultimately just makes them feel plain unsafe. Now, through the lens of your studies, your long studies in this, I'd be really interested to hear what you make of the modern, what I think of as overwhelm of the human being.
All right. Yes, well, I think television is a good measure of that. When our kids were growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, when they were small, you did have Sesame Street and the Big Bird and Electric Company. And then there were other sort of, our kids didn't really see what I had to go through when I was little, the horrible little Road Runner and all the really buzzy, zappy cartoons that they had in those days. And they could actually learn something from some of these things, and it was sort of more calm. When I look at sometimes the things that my grandchildren look at, and the Disney vivid things and screaming all the time, and then the pounding commercials with the vivid colors, selling the poisonous candies and so on, it was very alarming to me, actually. And I tried to get, we tried to get our kids to tone down the volume for the grandkids. But it's difficult because the minute they get, especially once they get old enough to start going to even the first grade, because all their friends are swimming in this sea of things and the drum beat, the level at which the video is edited, and the unscrupulous, Coca-Cola, the sugar frenzies and all this. It's really, and I think actually the brain waves coming out of the TV, I think it really is a caution, So I think it would be good to have a balance. We tried ourselves somewhat to keep a balance of TV and things, and we didn't even have to deal with cell phones and all that sort of thing, which a lot of the kids get addicted to those at a very early age now, and they want their own at 5 and 6 and 7, and I see some parents that I can see now give it to them, But one thing I have to say about the children of today, it seems to me that the planet at this time is so deranged as a whole. And, the last democracies, which is us and the European Union pretty much, from having thought we conquered over totalitarian Russia only in the in the early 90s, less than 30 years ago. And now dictators everywhere and this fake populism and corporate control of everything. It's really quite deranged. And the climate. Somehow, I don't know, it might be my fantasy, but when I see young kids, I think heroine coming to this planet at this time. From the Buddhist worldview, there are many other planets in the galaxy and the universe. This is not the only one. And this one is in a particular crisis, which I think maybe will lead to something great, maybe because these kids are great. They're special beings, I feel. And so that a little bit makes me less anxious about this overload than I would otherwise be. And but I think you're absolutely right, and I think your modeling of simplicity, and clearly you're affecting and helping a lot of families with what I see on your website and so on. I think that's incredibly valuable. I know this guy who lives in San Francisco, and his brother is the guy who ran for president for a while from San Francisco, the billionaire. I forget, names are hard for me now, I'm almost 80. But the younger guy, he has the thing for children's television. nonprofit, and he really goes after them. Even about what they sell and what they do, and the level of jolting that they do on the young brain. To influence them and capture them, as consumers from a young age, which they do. They really do that, and they do it consciously, and they drag sociological and psychological academics in who study these things, how to influence, and they're relentless and merciless, I think, and they have to be controlled. So he does do that, and what you're doing is countering that, and that's what I want to know about, because I really admire it.
Well, recently, Bob, you might be interested. There's been a conference for years on how to sell and how to market to children.
Yeah.
And it's a very well-known conference attended by all the great, and like the breakfast cereal companies, all the food companies, the sugar purveyors, the car companies, the tech companies. And I wanted to go undercover. I wanted to get in to this conference.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get in, because if they just check me out, they see that I've been on all these, they see that I have a firm stand against that. But a little while ago, they had an online conference, so I got in. They accepted me, and so I was embedded. I went undercover.
I get it.
And it was worth the very significant price of admission, because Bob, they have a new term, a new name for parenting. We're no longer called parents. All through this conference, parents were referred to with two words, not a parent, but purchasing friction.
Purchasing
friction.
Really?
Friction. So, and the conference's single aim was, quote unquote, the removal of purchasing friction.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
That's demonic.
Well, it is. And it's a very calculated attempt. $16 billion a year are spent on it.
Oh.
To erode the authoritative, loving, kind, caring values of family life. And that for me was a little bit of a wake-up call, even if I perhaps needed it, and perhaps I did, as to how conscious and nefarious these attempts. So when you talk about the nature of it changing and buzzing and booming, and the very fast-paced sales style that is coming out of the screen, I think you're absolutely right, if I may say. And the other aspect of this is that it's very psychologically, as you alluded to, well-studied, very consciously done.
Yes.
And their main delivery, because I listened in very carefully to, well, how are they doing this? How are they delivering this erosion, this conscious erosion of family life?
Yeah.
And so I followed the money, and a vast majority of their money is being spent on screen advertising, on influencers, on screens.
Yes.
And so I said this to someone recently. I came out of this conference and I said to a neighbor, do you know they're spending $16 billion a year on removing adult influence over children? And she said, well, where are they spending? And I said, exactly, they're spending it on screens. And so she held up her hand and said, oh, I've got a $16 billion hand. I said, what do you mean? She said, I just unplugged the screen.
Yeah.
I wonder what you make also, Bob, of how, through the lens of your long studies in Buddhism, that you see this attempt to, in a sense, almost pervert humanity, to take humanity via our children in this direction. Do you feel like, do you feel it's like, I gave the example of it's very conscious with a certain group of people, but what do you make of where we're up to now and the need to simplify? I wonder, I'd be very interested to hear from you, if I may ask.
Yeah, well, the thing is that it's the fact that there are people who make their living that way, and they don't really make a living anyway because they're all hyper. They want to make a million. They don't want to make a living. They just want to make a million, and they don't live. They make a living, but they don't live a living because they're all hyper to get some more. Because the whole greed energy of the consumerism is driving them crazy, and then. I taught in the elite college university system for 50 years, and I was, always felt I was sort of a stranger in a strange land there, but I was also happy to do it because I did reach a certain, maybe 5,000-10,000 students over those years. And who came, but it's not. They don't make money going to religious studies or philosophical studies, so there's not a big, it was not a big required course to study Buddhism, or to study comparative religion, or to study the meaning of life, philosophy. But our education system has become ruined also in this respect that. A college president or university president will mention the word decency in a convocation for freshmen and in a graduation ceremony for graduates. And that'll be it. There will be no teaching of decency. There will be, when I was at Amherst College, which considers itself very highly elite. I taught at Harvard, Amherst, and then mainly at Columbia now. Until recently. And when I started teaching courses in ethics, my Christian colleagues in those sort of waspy places, they said, oh, you're lucky. You can teach Buddhist ethics because it's considered like some kind of antiquity or like some kind of exotic thing. If we said we were doing a Christian ethics, they would really get on our case, the rest of the faculty and we're trying to, the chapel is, secularism is being violated or whatever you call it, And, but then they said, under your cover, we're going to do that. And then we had Jewish ethics and Christian ethics, Hindu ethics, and it started to be a fashion a little bit in at least Amherst and a little bit at Columbia. And then students who would come there, they would actually be taught to think about what is life for? What are people for, in Wendell Berry's famous phrase, And going against the tide that really intensified from the time of Reagan, actually. In the 60s, there was a lot of questing among the young. 70s, it was lessened, and the sort of backlash was happening. And then by Reagan's time, students just were completely frenzied about making money, and getting pre-med, pre-law. Everybody's pre-med and pre-law, or economics majors, this kind of thing, political science, and that's the church of the universities. Is the secularism, and the high priests are the natural scientists, and the social scientists try to be as much natural scientists as they can. Even the philosophers try to pretend they're mathematics and they're sort of handmaidens of the natural scientists. And there's no more meaning of life. Forget it. That's an old-fashioned notion. And find that somewhere. If you're not well adapted to making money, then you can find a shrink. And look into the meaning of things. So it really is a corruption of consumer, sort of late industrial society that has lost its way and become addicted to secularism, and it's the bad side of secularism. The good side of secularism, in our American ideal was that no one religion could control the government. That was good. The pluralism is good. But the fact that the religion of materialism does control everything, that's become a new kind of inquisition, and very, very bad,
Well, the religion of materialism, in a sense, like as a parent, as someone raising children, it's like, what do I do about that? Where do I make my stand? And what increasing number of people, like you're saying, Bob, you know, because when you become a parent, everything gets, it becomes more important. Everything becomes just that little bit more amplified because you now have children that you're placing into this world. There's an
Yeah.
extra responsibility. And I heard for years when I first began working with saying to folk, we need to keep it simple for children. We need to just dial it back. We need to give children a childhood, which is almost an embarrassing thing to have to say, but it's, and more people have now, I've got this voice inside them, I'm discovering, of something is not okay. This is not okay. We've almost like reached peak materialism. We've reached peak anxiety.
Yeah.
And what do we do? What can we do in the face of all that? And part of what the simplicity parenting movement has been offering people is a way to say, you know what, we don't need that extra toy. Just that simple statement. We don't need that extra sports club for our child, that extra piano coaching, or that travel team, or we don't need those
tiger mommy. Yeah.
We don't need those screen. And just by the simple act of simplifying, it's almost become, someone said to me once, it's almost anti-American simplifying.
It is.
And I said to them, it is anti-American, perhaps, but it's new humanity. It's discovering, because Bob, what
but it isn't anti-American. I think America has a good side somewhere. I stick up.
Absolutely.
You know, the ideal of all people are created equal and this and that. Of course, it's never been lived up to fully, but it has gradually gotten there. And I think this, after this catastrophe that we're in now and the worst ones that are coming, I think we will have to find out, use that kind of ingenuity that we have, still some degree of, and tone back and really, you know, get Apple, Facebook. I think Facebook may be hopeless, but get them, the politicians, get them immune from corporate control, which we could easily do actually, just by if we had a way, if we elected the right people, and then learn to manage this terrible situation. You know? The key thing is, from my point of view now, of course, there's a complexity of ideology, right? But one of the key things about secularism is that it's a kind of insanity, because its high priests are the natural scientists. And the natural scientists have taken as an item of dogma that there's no mind, no such thing, and never mind spirit. And therefore, that a child is just a product. And, you know, it's just a material, the brain, the child thinks it exists because its brain fools it into thinking so. The parent, or what did you call them? The
purchasing friction.
Purchasing friction. The purchasing friction thinks they have a mind, but they know because they learned in school that they don't, but they're trying to think they do. And they're all going to be nothing, really. In other words, it's all meaningless, so therefore make money. It's a really sick and crazy and even psychopathic ideology, in my opinion. Now, you can't say that people have to, now the fundamentalist church people, they rush back to some old-fashioned sort of anti-scientific thing, which is the wrong extreme. So how do we do it? The question there is, how do we do it and use our own sort of sovereignty as spiritual and mental people without imposing a new ideology and a new dogma, but just opening to the spiritual aspect of a child's existence. You know, for example, when I look at a child, like what I said, that does come out of what I learned from Buddhism, but when I learned it, it wasn't because it was Buddhism, but it was because I always felt that way, that a child is more than just a product of their parents. Each one has their own mission, if you will. And of course, the lovely thing about the rebirth view, or the multi-life view, which in fact was the Mediterranean view in the time of Christ, actually, in the time of Plato, in the time of Pythagoras, and so forth. It was a commonplace view, not an abstruse thing, of different religions. You know? But anyway, that there's something that the child has brought to their being that wasn't just what was given by the parents or by the culture. They have their own spiritual special knack and flavor, which with 4 children, they definitely have their own thing. And you can analyze it in all different kinds of ways. But that's the first starting key, I think. And then again, the future, that there will, because the child they start asking like, why did Granny die? Or why did the dog die? Where did he go? They want to know. And so the idea that there's more to life than just being a material machine, I think is very helpful. It doesn't have to be Buddhist, doesn't have to be Christian, Jewish, Hindu, but those traditions can be okay if they're not fanatic and dogmatic. But the idea that it's a spiritual thing, life has a spiritual evolutionary aspect to it and a special meaning of it, I think that will be enormously helpful.
Well, one of the in ancient Greek times, they had the term telos. And telos was the spirit seed of a child.
Yeah.
The spirit seed, just like the telos, the spirit intent, or the metaphor might be the telos of an acorn is to be an oak tree.
Right.
But the spirit seed of a child is we are at our best in humanity when we have that spirit seed be laid on the sea, on the fertile soil of values,
sure,
of
absolutely.
Deeper values that understand that this child has come into this world to do something, and that was an intent long before they were born.
Yes,
and that they have come into this world with a telos, with a spirit imbued intent. Now, if I may expand on that one more step, that telos, a common word we have for that is quirk. That's their quirk in some ways. It expresses itself, and every child has a quirk. It makes them so lovable and so infuriating, actually, at times. but that's their quirk. And if you have 4 children like you do, each one of them has their own character, their own quirk. So they have their quirk.
You're saying
now,
quirk?
Yes, yes. If I can say it in American, quirk. Quirk.
Right.
Yeah. And now what I've discovered over the years is through academic study, but also through just one's own observation, and the observation of many others, because we have over 1,000 simplicity parenting coaches around the world.
Really? Wow.
On many countries, and so this feedback we get is very cross-cultural.
Wow.
And one of the things that we see is that when children, when there is too much going on in their lives and they're becoming overwhelmed, that quirk becomes what we call fevered. There's almost and I call that in one of my books, soul fever. There's a fever of the soul, and then we start having all these ADD, ODD, PDD, OCD.
Yes, terrible.
There is no shortage of Ds. However, that is the outcome of cumulative stress that has become normal. However, if we simplify a child's life, if we give them balance, so many parents have said to me over the years, I feel like I've got my little girl back. I feel like, we dialed it back. We understood the power of less. We did less. We had more time at home, simple rituals, simple meals together, simple games together. And Bob, the fascinating thing for me over the years, and it never fails to move me, and it does every time, is that if we keep living a balanced life, then that quirk doesn't stay as a quirk. That's the gift. That is the gift of that is the genius. So the very same thing that is the disorder, is also the gift. Yes. And I'm not denying there are not some of us human beings that are are more programmed, to put it that way, to be hyperactive or to be overactive or to be obsessional. I mean, we all have our quirks, but a child who is very, very diagnosed with ADHD, for example, and I've worked with countless numbers of these children over the years.
Yes.
Their quirk is that they're just busy. They're busy children.
I know.
But their gift is they are the movers and shakers. And when life can calm down enough and they're not in fight or flight and they're not in survival mode, then their gift is to have good timing and be the shapers, the leaders, the movers. And it's the very same child that we might call disordered, who is
absolutely.
is the child who will be a leader and be fearless.
Yes, wonderful.
And so that is what we're discovering over and over again, is that telos, that spirit seed,
I like that,
needs balance, calmness, quietness, of course, as well as excitement that any child will have, and that fertile soil of living in a family that stands on its values, not the church's values necessarily. It may or may not be, but the deeper family values. And then that spirit seed takes root.
Yes. Yes, I think so. I think that I call it, that is from Buddhism. In the biology of life, there is a third gene, what I call a spiritual gene. The word is gotra, actually, in Sanskrit. And gotra comes from, like gene does. Gene comes from gens in Latin, I think, which comes from tribe, and from the parents, the two genes that meet. But there's this third gene, which is the gene that the being brings from their previous time. And I once had a dialogue with a Christian who was not, and I was complimenting them, saying that at least they have a future life. So they have an idea that the soul goes on after death in some form, and that gives them a little cautionary feeling, a little bit, maybe too much, depending on which version. But it also gives them an inspiration of heaven and whatever gods, that the God they believe in has something nice in store for them. But then they said, but we don't have anything previous. And then I said, well, you mean God didn't know about you before your spirit came? And they said, well, where did your spirit come from? Oh, God put it in there, they said. And I said, oh, really? Well, but then God didn't have it. Where was God keeping it before he put it in there? I asked. Did he have it in a filing cabinet or where was it? In the drawer? Or you mean it didn't exist until he suddenly had it? He didn't know about you before you were born, really? Then how come he thought you up? How can that be? If God has been beginningless, you must be beginningless. And so then they can think of it as coming from that way, The Buddhist thinks of it as an individual evolutionary thing, not just species, But
that's why when a child comes to us with the mysteries of their behavior, when you look at a child, you think, oh my goodness, there's a mystery to be solved there.
Yes, sure.
But when these children grow, and Bob, they would come to you at the college you were teaching, my hope is that the children that we give to the educators of the future, through living a life of values, not so much, and I hear this a lot, we have a child-centered home, and I understand what people mean by that we want to have a child-friendly home.
Right.
But I don't believe in child-centered homes, to be honest with you. What I believe in is value-centered homes.
I agree with that.
Because it's a deep well of values. And right now, we need those more, perhaps, than ever before.
Absolutely.
But what I see, when I see, because I also teach at a university, and what I see coming through the doors more and more these days, and it gives me a lot of hope, is that I see people challenging the magnetic north of toxic pop culture, who are looking for their own true north. It's the true north, not magnetic north.
Right.
And if we can raise children to really question the where everyone is going. We have to do this because everyone is doing it. And even as parents, be able to stand as gatekeepers to our family's values and say, you know what, everyone is doing that, and that looks like fun. We can do some of it, or no, we're simply not doing that. We're not going to go there. I'm not going to give my 3-year-old a smartphone, or I'm not going, or whatever it is,
Yes,
whatever it is.
I totally agree.
Then what we're doing is giving to the educators of the world children and young people who will be looking for their own true north,
Yes.
and not
Wonderful.
as you were describing, the magnetic north of courses that is designed purely to make money.
Yes. Yes, ADHD, and then this horrible Ritalin thing that they do. I just think it's horrible. It's demonic, and you mentioned it at the beginning. I personally think it's the pulse that comes through the television that is too jarring to the growing brain. It's an overload, and I think it could be measured if there was money, if there was funding for scientists to measure the destructive effects of overstimulation of the growing brain coming out of the screen. I think there would be a real change, but they're only funded by, at Columbia, I was in a chairman's department one time, a chairperson's department. I was the chair of religion at that time. And the lady who was chairing the psych department came in a bad mood. And everybody said, Darcy, what's the matter? Like, well, she's usually a very cheerful and friendly person. She was friendly. She was just in a bad mood. And then she said, well, I hate my department. She said, I hate psychology field. And then, really? Well, why, Darcy? And she said, we don't do research. We don't do psychology. All we do is we work for Novartis, she said. So she funded, that's to make drugs, right? To make chemicals, to go in to also sell and to bypass the consumer friction and get at people's brains and control them right chemically through the brain.
Well, a good
I think
example,
it's terrible. It's really terrible.
Beg your pardon, Bob. A good example of this, just seeing we're talking as an example of ADHD, is that in a study that I did, which was funded by the Fetzer Foundation, actually.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the long and short of that study, one aspect that really came to me was that attention deficit is such a silly name. It's attention excess, if anything.
Yeah.
And these children have flexible attentions. Now, what I mean by that, what I discovered after 4 years of studying this with my colleague Bonnie River, is that it's what I call far away. Children have attentions. And they have a far away or contemplative attention, and that's a far away attention.
Yes.
And that's that's a peripheral attention.
Yes.
And then they have a proximal attention, which means they're paying attention to what's going on in the classroom, whatever, but it's in the neighborhood. And then they have an attention of in the house or at the point. So now I'm focusing, I'm working, I'm really focused. And in education, we tend to only value the point attention.
That's right.
Get to the point. But some of the greatest discoveries, scientific, spiritual, philosophical, have been at the peripheral attention.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
And how do we now, when a child is sitting at their desk, how can we help teachers say to that child, are you thinking something far away? I mean, if it's an 8-year-old, right? Are you thinking something far away? And you might get just a little yes. What are you thinking that's far away? Well, I'm thinking about why those leaves are all moving and the wind is hardly blowing. Right? That's the contemplative.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Now, of course, the teacher is trying to teach fractions. So where is the meeting point? The meeting point is to honor the peripheral, the far away attention, to bring it into the neighborhood, to bring it to the point, because the child needs to learn fractions, but we need to meet a child's attention where it is. I call this
Yeah.
meet and move. You
Yes, yes.
meet the child's attention where it is, and you move it to where it needs to be. I get that. But we are discounting the contemplative attention. And if we
Exactly.
do that, what's going to happen to those? See, if we cultivate the contemplative, the peripheral attention,
Yes.
when we give those students to our professors at our colleges, they are going to be amazing kids.
They are. They are. Do you know Richie Davidson's work at the Mind and Life organization?
Not
And
so much.
the neuroscientist at Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, who he's a neuroscientist and he works with the Dalai Lama and Goleman, the emotional intelligence author,
Yes.
and so forth. They kind of work together. And they have introduced, because the Dalai Lama pushed them beyond their conventional neuroscience to study the neuroscience of meditative states and mindfulness and compassion meditation, different kinds of meditation. And that's how he got interested. But the Dalai Lama got tired of them just, studying meditators, and he wanted them to develop curriculums for children where they would be given very gentle and very not at all sort of doctrinaire and not connected with any kind of religious anything, but sort of learning to develop a little more inner awareness about how their own minds are working by having quiet moments, and then that Goldie Hawn, she picked up on it, and she was in the schools in Canada going around pitching that they would take a brain break, she called it, the kids in classes. And then I saw a presentation by some school teachers from Canada who were using this research of Davidson, and they were introducing in second grade, third grade, first grade classrooms some kind of moments where people would ask the kids to talk about what they were feeling. And they even had a thing they had on the wall with a needle. And on the one side was an iceberg and the other side was a volcano. And then they would have kids come in, well, where do you feel you are today? Are you near the iceberg or the volcano? And et cetera, to get them to develop their emotional intelligence by becoming more aware of how you can learn how your own mind works, just very lightly, not with a view to becoming enlightened or anything, but just with a view to not reacting, push button way when someone picks up your toy or something, you know what I mean? And not being too worried about this and too pressured about that, but seeing how your mind picks up these different things. And I think, and Dalai Lama loved it. He thought it was so great. And then there, somewhere in Atlanta, they were doing that. And in Illinois, they got that in the school system, some sort of a little bit of, and they sort of say meditation, but they don't emphasize that because they know that then some parents will think that they're inflicting Eastern religion or something, and so they're very careful about that. But it's really quite interesting, and I don't know. I never saw anyone from the Simplicity movement interconnect with them, but I think that would be a very interesting thing.
Thank you.
And I'm not, among Buddhists, I'm not one of these people who sells meditation as the be-all and the end-all. Neither is Dalai Lama. And furthermore, the most important kind of meditation in Buddhism, in fact, is kind of discursive, analytic, investigative, it's searching for meaning and this type of thing, and seeing through superficial, delusory things and so on. It isn't just holding the mind still. In fact, that can become a trap if you become sort of into like, you have a place you go where your mind is still, and then you get more jangled by dealing with the world. So that can be too extreme. So I don't do that. But on the other hand, a little bit of mindfulness and a little bit of inner awareness about, and sort of in the encouragement that, you're not a victim of external circumstances entirely. It's really, the main message there is you can sort of figure out what is it that makes you react to circumstances and kind of learn to a little bit pause, like take a breath, that sort of thing. It's really basically cultural common knowledge, like Thomas Jefferson take 10 breaths. Take a few, 3 deep breaths if someone bothers you. If they really bother you, take 10 or 20, if it gets really bad. He had a thing like that. So it doesn't involve, religion. But anyway, I think that's really great. And I want, so our time is, I know, short. I want to ask you, did you found this simplicity movement, or are you one of the early founders? Is it an Australian thing, or did it happen all over the world simultaneously, or how did this movement occur? You said there was thousands of them.
Yes. I feel more my role in this was to coalesce. Yes, I wrote the book called Simplicity Parenting, and yes, of course, that helped.
Okay.
But it did help coalesce a voice that was speaking to so many of us inside us.
Yes.
And it's interesting, Bob, because I'm just looking at the questions, Wyatt, who introduced us earlier.
Oh, yes.
Perhaps you just answered in through a certain lens Andrew's question about the introduction of mindfulness. It was quite organic, sort of lead into our questions in our last 15 minutes or so. So thank you for that. I wanted to.
I didn't know that. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Is it in the chat or in the Q&A?
It's in the Q&A.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Okay, great.
Ricardo has posted a question that is, for me, it comes right to the core of our discussion this evening in some ways. And Ricardo, thanks for posting this question. Is that, Ricardo writes about protecting children and keeping them out. You write in a way that takes them the form of keeping them out of the world. How can we at the same time teach them to trust the world, to trust life and others when they see so much tension, injustice, danger just beyond the doors of our house? That's beautifully put, if I may say.
Yeah.
One of the metaphors, and it's really only lightly a metaphor, but Ricardo, I hope this strikes a chord for you. Once I was on holidays, and I was standing high on a hill, and I looked down at a very traditional fishing village. And in that fishing village, there was a harbor and a big harbor wall that came around, almost like a parent's arm, like holding a child.
Oh, great.
And then inside the harbor, and it was the lobster fishermen and women were coming in, and the harbor master would come, it was a he, would come out of his house and he would check the boats as they came in. He would talk to them, but in the harbor, the water was calm.
Yeah.
Outside, the water was bumpy, a little bit bumpy outside, and then out in the open seas, it was quite choppy and tumultuous. Now, the fisher people would come in and they would replenish, they would restock, they would restore themselves, and they would get ready to go back out again into the stormy waters. And around the harbor were all the places that you could fix your engines, you could fix your lobster pots, you could fix things. And I stood there watching this, thinking, this is so much like family life.
It's beautiful.
We sail out of these stormy waters as children back into the relative calm, like that harbor master, back into the calm of that safe harbor of home, as much as it can be. And of course, one has to always, it's not always safe. I mean, I don't want to presume that is the case for all children, but I'm talking as a striving, as an aim.
Yes.
And then the little children will go out of the harbor and they'll bob about outside the walls in their little boats, and back in they come again, metaphorically. Then when your children are teenagers, they'll sail further out into the quite stormy social waters of social injustice. My 18-year-old daughter, for example, at the moment, is interning with the ACLU in their immigrant rights department. So she has sailed out into those stormy waters.
Yes.
And then they come back, and Bob, as you know, then the older children, they sail far away. But Ricardo, my point, and I hope this might create a picture for you too, is that it's not that we're trying to keep our children from the world. It's that we're trying to create a safe enough harbor so that they can repair, so that they're ready to go back out further and further and further. Each time they're ready for it as they grow. But it's not a bubble. It's not an enclosure. But they go out till they can become eco-warriors, social warriors.
Wonderful.
And so the picture, but even then, my daughter who works for the ACLU goes on ice raids, the mop up after ice raids, and she comes home at 18. She started when she was 16, and she would sometimes be quite upset. She would sail back into the waters of our safe harbor as a family, repair, get ready, and back out she would go again. And that's, Ricardo, that's what I mean. And I hope that helps a little bit.
Bob, it does.
Your comments?
Well, I think that's a wonderful image of the harbor and the wall. It made me think of that English TV program about that funny doctor and that little village on the English coast where he lives. Doctor or somebody. It's a very popular television show.
Doc Martin.
Yeah, that's Doc Martin. That's a harbor and a wall, the little boat. And it's a beautiful image. And I think family to be like that is really, really great. I love that. And your daughter, what a brave girl, really brave woman, young woman. I'm just thinking that I had just finished reading after I did a little skipping, but I read almost all of it. The Mary Trump's book.
Yes.
It is amazing. Horrendous. What that poor man went through as a child, training him to be this kind of semi-monstrous character he has become. And I've always said, and people maybe thought I was joking or I didn't mean it or I was just saying it, but I have always felt a compassion for him, although I vigorously oppose, even angrily oppose his viciousness, and cruelty and insanity, But I've always felt that why does he do these things? Because he's completely locked up in a prison in his own heart, in the worst way. This woman has a detail of how he was brought up and what happened and how this and that. And there you have a case of the child instantly thrown into the ocean, and completely deprived of any compassion or any kind of anything, and learning that what you're supposed to do is just shut down and then also be vicious and beat other people up, and never had a correction. And in a way, he's kind of giving us, maybe we can be hopeful because in these last couple of years, he is taking these bad tendencies in our culture and in late consumerist, militarist capitalism, and he has put all his negative aspects on full display in every day, all the time. What next? Oh, it's even worse. The next thing, And we have 100 days. I anticipate even more, but. If you go behind that in this context that we're talking about children, and the idea of somebody who does not give those very young, extraordinary beings the chance to mirror, the chance to have their needs fulfilled, to be embraced, to be stroked, to be soothed, to be quiet, the beautiful harbor that you paint, the picture you paint of the harbor. And then be surprised that they turn out monstrous, or they join a corporation that learns how to get rid of the friction and sell unhealthy, even poisonous stuff, so that the kids in the environmental injustice, social injustice, the people of color, the poor people in our culture, not only are they assaulted by bad television and selling bad candies, but they live in a place where there's no decent food, and they have 20-ounce Pepsi-Cola stuffed down their throats, and they glug them down, and they have adult onset diabetes at 14.
You know, Bob,
Yes.
both. It's interesting. That's a very natural bridge to what I'm looking at the questions here, and it's
Yes.
Kate and
Oh, yeah.
Sandra and others
Kate's my
also
wonderful neighbor. She's a great
are.
parent.
Oh gosh, really? Kate asks, and this is echoed in a number of other questions. What do we mean by values?
Yeah.
Kate, if I
You
can,
go first.
if I can give just a very brief example, um, in my of all of, like many of us would share the value of respect. Many of us would share the value of kindness, of
Yes.
just deep and simple
Absolutely.
kindness. A value that one value that might perhaps be interesting to you, Kate, and Sandra as well, is that in my family, for example, and in my teaching in schools and in my counseling in schools, a value I have is that of welcoming differing perspectives and
Mm-hmm.
not seeing them as opposing opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Because can we imagine how different the world would be if someone said something or if we disagreed with something that someone was saying, and we saw it
Right.
as their perspective, as
Yes.
opposed to something we needed to fight. Now,
Right.
at times I get it, we do need to fight, but I tried, my wife and I, to raise our children so that we didn't have these arguments of, that would be trying to dominate and control the children.
Right. Right.
And to have them see each other's perspectives. And Sandra, one of the things you might be interested in, fast forwarding,
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, many, many years. And there my two daughters are. Forgive me for personalizing, but it's a very brief
No, no,
story.
no, please.
Thank you. We're at Boston Airport, Logan Airport, and my daughter, the 18-year-old, is going to, she was 17 then, going to her first big trip outside the United States to Germany to do an exchange. My older daughter is a world traveler now. She's 20 years old. She's been in many countries. And my younger daughter is nervous. So they're both at the airport together. One's flying east, one's flying west. Very interesting phenomena. They go through customs. They have to take off their shoes. My daughter gives me this naughty smile because I had to fight her to get her to put on shoes. But anyway, and then my older daughter is saying, "I'll take you to the gate. I'll show you how it all works. I'll just stay with me, and I'll show you what to do." So my wife and I are. You know that feeling, Bob, where you do know that a new phase of life is coming for the whole
Oh, yeah.
family.
Absolutely.
And so we're standing there, and they turn the corner. I happen to catch them, and they give a little wave as they're turning the corner, and I notice that they're holding hands.
Ah, that's so sweet. That's wonderful.
Now, it's years and years and years of the value of perspective taking,
Uh-huh.
of being able to listen to each other. And my wish for all of us as parents is that our children, long after we're gone, dead and buried, that those children will be now adults and still looking after each other, but more, as importantly, looking after others and the planet.
Yes.
And that's,
They're already doing it at ACLU. That's amazing.
yeah, and I hope that helps them. The number of questions that have come up around values, Bob. Values for you. What do you think are the core values that we should be teaching our children?
Well, you said them: kindness, love, and open-mindedness is what when you're saying perspectival kind of thing. Open-mindedness is the key. One of the mental addictions or afflictions that Buddhists tries to overcome is called actually conviction. And people translate as a mistaken conviction, but actually they don't always put the word mistaken there. Mm. They mean like, so when you get stuck or convicted into an idea, that then you're pushing that idea, know, right. And then you're not really open-minded. And so you don't have this, the famous meditation on compassion called the exchange of self and other, which is nothing more. It's not religious. It's what it is. It's like the English proverb, put yourself in the other person's shoes. So you suddenly look at what's going on from their perspective. And that is a really important one. You know, my friend, the Indian, ethnically Indian but Tibetan monk, Tenzin Priyadarshi, he founded in MIT by some strange karma the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values. And by transformative, he meant things that would make everyone's life better. And all of them, I'm sorry, I just drank this excessively strong tea. Of all of them, the compassion and kindness and seeing the other person's perspective is the absolute critical one. Like, for example, the Dalai Lama wrote a letter to W after 9/11 and begged him not to respond to 9/11 with war. But the 21st century could not be a century of war as the 20th was. That please dialogue. What is bothering these people? Why did they attack you? You know, what's their complaint? You know, how can you find them and talk to them and so on? And war will never make it better, you know. And in fact, he said he wrote that letter so strongly, and he had met W before that, but he wrote personally, you know. But he wrote that strongly. His own secretary was saying, "Oh, you can't send that to the American president. Oh, you can't do that. You know, they have the Pentagon, you know, America." And he did anyway. He did send it. And of course, you know, W didn't listen. And we know that he's painting portraits and everything, and I don't know if he admits it, but he probably not, but he must deeply regret how he destroyed the Middle East even more than it was, you know, by that ridiculous invasion, you know.
Well, Bob, you know, our time is almost over now.
Yes.
I'm reminded of a little boy in the kindergarten.
Yes.
Who came sobbing to a teacher, and the teacher said, "Oh, what's the matter?" And he said, "Well, it all began when he hit me back."
That's a good one. That's a really good one. What a shock! What a shock!
Mm-hmm. We have to, I think, be ever mindful of our own actions, of what we're doing, that then brings something towards us like this. And so much of the conversation this evening has been orbiting around that deeper consciousness of what we're trying to bring children today.
Yes.
And I just really can't.
I have a footnote to that. I don't know why.
Yes.
I have a crazy wish. You know, that thing about he hitting me back, you know, we mustn't make people too afraid to be a little, you know, reactive to their own kids. And what I'm thinking of my brilliant wife, who I consider the best parent of all time. I remember, like, she loved nursing her children. And she was a big nurser. She was not nursed. I was not nursed. We were born in the 40s, you know. And she really enjoyed it enormously. But occasionally at a certain stage, one of them might bite. And she would just flick with her finger on the cheek, just so they have a little sting, you know, not any kind of injury or anything, but just a little sting back, you know, in a loving way, not a harsh thing. The bite was not necessarily like agonizing. She didn't scream or anything, but she, oh, you know, she would go like that, and then she would just flick on the cheek, this little thing, and totally lovingly. But it was a subliminal message that there is someone else out there.
It's interesting.
Might hit back, you know.
You know, and it's. I know our time now is up, but
I hate that. I don't like when time is up.
I know. Me neither. So many questions have come in. We've tried to group them as best we can.
Oh, good.
But we gave this as our closing time, and I feel honored to let everyone go tonight to get on with their evening or afternoon
Yes, so they
or
can go talk
day.
to their kids.
Yes, and go to. So for me, just finally,
Okay, final statement.
is this giving the space and grace for childhood,
Mm-hmm.
even though we're being told in so many ways, invisibly and right up front, that things, we've got to move faster, we've got to be able to keep up with the pace of modern life. The children of today that can be self-creative, self-motivated, innovative, they're the children we need in the future, because frankly, we're creating a bit of a mess. And we need these children not to be passive consumers of other people's creativity on screens and so
Yes.
on. We need living children, so that they can take on and join us in the healing that is so desperately needed now. Bob,
Mm-hmm.
just last words to you, if I may.
Yeah, okay. So my last word is, as a grandparent, that talking to you is so fun, because I'm remembering all of our different things about our children and what we did about them. And I had this strong feeling, because my father had a job where sometimes he had to take a night shift at a journalistic job, head of a department, and sometimes they'd be short and he'd have to work at night. So he was physically unfamiliar to me as I grew up. In other words, as a physical presence, I didn't see him as often as I could. So I took advantage of the academic life and worked at home a lot. And of course, I was always under terrible pressure. We were not wealthy, had to get tenure, get to publish and perish, whatever. But I was presence at home, So I tried to be around a lot. I shared chores. I washed diapers when we were traveling in India and you didn't have Pampers, and I did that. And it makes me remember these things talking to you, which I don't always think about. But then I just want to say this. The Dalai Lama wrote a book with a French lady called Sophie Still-Rivere called A Call for Revolution, in which basically it was like a summons to Greta Thunberg. Like, speak up to the grown-ups, because they are not able to change the trajectory that is going to wreck the place. So it's you. I have confidence you will do this. You're a generation that has the courage and the power to do that. And so I love that he says that. But I as a grandparent, feel, and maybe it's an excuse for my ongoing workaholism and my addiction to work. It's possible, but I certainly feel, at least in the next 100 days, and then the 100 after that, and the 3 sets of 100 days that are coming up, that we must do everything we can possibly do to stop this destruction of their planet, of these young kids. They are going to live on the planet, which is it's not going to be 2090, where you have another fire like that in the Melbourne area, in the Sydney, Melbourne area, like that horrible fire that killed all those koalas, It's going to be 2030. California is burning like 1,000 times more than it did before already, and by 2035, 40, it'll be game over in a lot of areas that people don't now expect it to be. So I just feel, as a grandpa, I want my young ones, grandchildren, I have one great granddaughter actually, and I want them to know at least that we did everything we could possibly do. And that's a kind of an example for them, that they count, that every individual, even if it's at $5 to a climate activist as opposed to no dollars for climate denier, a vote for a climate activist versus no vote for a climate denier. That's a hugely powerful thing by each individual. And so I just feel, I know that's a little off topic, but that's a value. That's a grandpa value.
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla membership community and viewers like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit our websites at tibethouse.us or menla.org.